is a very small field kit with some pens, pencils, a little watercolour kit, and a nature journal book, which really helps to stop and sit and observe. You know, for example, on this beautiful Westringia, looking at the shapes of the leaves, the colours of the leaves, top and bottom, the way that the flowers are structured, and noticing some of the details in the plant as you're looking at it. And nature journaling is not about being an artist. It's actually about being a nature observer. So you can use text, you can use symbols, you can do colour mapping of the plants and the things that you're looking at. You can write questions, and it's very much a practice about inquiry, about wondering, curiosity, and looking a little bit more closely at what we see every day around us. Nature, and this is another beautiful photograph that I took up on Oakey Hill yesterday, and you can see the gorgeous autumn late afternoon sunlight lighting the side of these gorgeous plants that are in full flower right now all around Canberra. And there's nothing like having a walk in nature to calm the mind, remind us that the world is truly a wonderful place. And I think that especially at the moment where we're dealing with really unprecedented times, the importance of mindfulness, of looking a little bit more closely and enjoying and appreciating nature is more important than ever. And so the topic of ecopsychology, there's a huge and growing body of knowledge and research around the world looking at ecopsychology and the benefits of exposure to the natural world and how that can help your health and promoting healing and well-being. Many of you may have come across Richard Louv, who's a journalist and very famous author of Last Child in the Woods, which was published in 2005 in the US. He is largely credited with starting a movement on nature research and thinking about the effects of nature on human well-being and mindfulness. So in his books, he's coined a term called nature deficit disorder, and it's something that has really become quite apparent with contemporary society as we've moved away from being in nature, being outdoors, and spending a lot more time on computers, in offices, and quite separated from the natural world. I think as we become more technologically efficient, we're also becoming more, experiencing the very real symptoms of nature deficit. So there's an enormous amount of research now demonstrating that nature is not only nice to have, but it's also a have to have for physical health and cognitive functioning with humans. So some of the epidemiological studies and research that have been done are actually being able to quantify the effects on humans. And being in nature actually helps to reduce high blood pressure. It helps to reduce heart disease and other chronic illnesses. There are observations around reductions in stress and anxiety levels for people who have chronic anxiety or stress-related illnesses. It improves mental health and well-being. And there's also some research now that's showing that it's not just about spending a short amount of time outside. You really need to spend at least 2 hours every week in a natural area to achieve the demonstrated benefits of being in nature. And there are also quite a few changes that we're starting to see as a result of this evidence from policymakers and governments. So many cities and countries are starting to add more parks and green spaces. We're seeing an increasing numbers of things like forest schools, for example, in Scandinavia and in the USA. And here in Australia, there's also a movement of nature education or outdoor schools that are taking kids out of the classroom 4 walls into natural settings to learn. healthcare providers are starting to embrace nature immersion, and including here in the ACT, GPs are starting to endorse nature walks for those with chronic illnesses and anxiety. Forest bathing has been something that Japan has been interested in for many years, and walking in the woods, and that's become a very widely supported phenomenon in Japan, with research demonstrating absolute benefits for treatment of infections and cancer patients. Legislative changes for the legal rights of nature are being introduced in many countries, and South America is really fascinating. They're starting to look at ways to give legal rights to rivers, to different parts of the landscape. And this is happening in Ecuador, Bolivia, in Costa Rica, and in New Zealand recently. And there's also some discussion now about actually looking at the human right to be in nature, which is also about preserving nature and making sure that it is accessible for humans as part of their everyday life. So policies for sustainability need to start to recognise these cognitive and emotional benefits of nature, and the need for this to be factored into economic ecosystem service models to inform livability and sustainability of the world's cities and of the places that we're living in around the world. So I list a little bit about NatureArt Lab. This is an organisation that I set up in 2017 here in Canberra to promote engagement with nature through art and science. It's about giving people a space and the skills to engage with nature and the environment in meaningful ways, and promoting an environment where people, where respect for people and their engagement with nature is paramount. We offer a really extensive range of programs, nature-inspired classes for adults, but also a very extensive children's program, which includes classes that we run at the Botanic Gardens in Canberra. We also work with places like Jerrabomberra Wetlands with the Young Rangers. We're doing things with public shopping centres and lots of different places now who've invited us to present our activities for children in public places. And of course, all of that's on hold temporarily while we manage the social isolation needs that we have in place at the moment. But we're still doing and adapting to that as well by offering online classes and online tutorials for people so that we can still continue to prioritise nature and nature engagement. The other thing that we do, which I'm not sure not everyone may be aware, but we run really unique national and international nature tour trips accompanied by professional artists and nature photography mentors. So our regular trips to Montague Island, for example, include an ecologist and art workshops and focusing on bird species that are breeding there every year. It's a truly exciting and inspiring thing to be able to see and be part of. We've taken groups across to Abrolhos Islands in Western Australia. We're planning some wonderful trips, immersive nature trips to Tasmania. And every year we also take groups across to Sabah, Malaysian Borneo, which is the heart of biodiversity in this region, and gives us an opportunity to look at different ecosystems in Sabah to meet and see some of the spectacular wildlife and nature that exists in that part of the world, and look at why it's so important, and also support the Malaysian government with its goal to promote ecotourism in a sustainable way that supports and keeps and protects nature in those places, as opposed to some of the palm oil and other industries that are also going on in Malaysia. We just recently also returned from a spectacular visit to Costa Rica, and Costa Rica is an exceptional country in terms of the government's priority for the environment and ecosystems, and it's been able to abolish the army and divert the funds and the policy priorities to protecting the remaining natural environments. And it again is one of the most biodiverse and important wildlife corridors between South America and North America, and many of the unique species that exist in that area. We're also taking a group across to the Galapagos Islands, Ecuador and Peru, which was going to be in August this year, but it's going to be next year now. And we also have plans to visit sub-Antarctic islands to look at the unique wildlife and environments in those areas. So, a question. What do Albert Einstein, Marie Curie and Leonardo da Vinci have in common? Does anybody know?
They all did drawings?
They did. And so all of those people kept a journal or a diary to record their experiences, their thoughts and their feelings about what they were seeing and learning. So from scientific geniuses to thoughtful observers, everyone can keep a journal. And it can be a hugely satisfying practice that helps to embed memories and build your confidence and understanding of, from the smallest thing right through to full landscapes and the way that that the environment appears. So nature journaling is a signature element of our programs for adults as well as children. And it's something that has become a very big program in the United States. I work very closely with John Muir, who is a nature journaler for many, many years and has published a book on nature journaling in the United States. Last year I went across and visited the States. This is his book that he has published, if you can see that just in the side screen there. It's The Law's Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling, and it features step-by-step guidelines on looking at different aspects of nature, but also drawing techniques, equipment and tools that you can use for nature journaling. So what I'm going to be doing is creating the Australian Guide to Nature Journaling in partnership with John Muir, and that's one of my pandemic projects that our wonderful team of tutors is working on at the moment. So, some of the benefits of nature journaling. Become more present through nature and art, and connect more deeply with your natural surroundings. Practice mindfulness. Slow down, pay attention and experience the natural world. Develop creativity and critical thinking skills. And that's a very, very important part of nature journaling. It's being able to actually ask a lot of questions about what you're looking at and what you're seeing, and asking why, asking how, asking, you know, what are the relationships with other species or other parts of the environment that you're looking at. So developing creativity through drawing and thinking, critical thinking, is a really essential element of nature journaling. And you certainly don't need to be an artist to do that. Everyone can draw, and everyone has an opportunity to pick up a pencil or a pen and sketch out some ideas, or even write down your thoughts, write down the questions of what you're seeing. You can take a quick photograph if you want to as well to support your nature journaling, but it's an incredibly accessible skill for everyone. And what it does, it also supports a growth mindset, which is really important. We need to continue learning throughout our lives, and every time you see something new, you'll have new questions and a new understanding of what's happening around you in nature. So nature journaling is learning the basics of how to observe and draw as you engage with nature. And combining those two things, nature and art, helps to create beautiful, unique and captivating images, which are a personal reflection on what you're seeing in nature. Now, also part of being a nature journaler, you're also being a naturalist. And naturalists are curious people. They're paying attention to detail. They're noticing different things that are out there. They're wondering about how things are and why they are. Spending more time outdoors and using all of your senses. So as a nature journaler and as a naturalist, you're listening, you're seeing, you're feeling, you're looking at surfaces and textures, you're understanding how light is working on three-dimensional surfaces, and noticing smells of perhaps eucalypt leaves in a forest, and documenting some of those things that you're seeing. And it's exploration, so it's looking in places and looking at things in a new way, and learning a whole lot of new things every time you start looking at something new. So to do this, very simple. You just need some basic drawing equipment, and I recommend that people have a couple of different pencils, a couple of different pens for drawing, and you can get some really lovely micron pens now that very accessible from most shops. If you can see, I'm just holding up a little kit here, which I use, which is just a little zip open up contain kit, which have all my pencils in it. I have a range of micron pens, which come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes and colors. So from very fine pens right through to pens that have a bit more width to them. A little eraser, a pencil sharpener, and a great tool to have in your kit is a little magnifying glass, so that you can have a closer look at things and see what's happening there. You might also like to have a little ruler in your set, just so that you can measure, scale, and document the size of things that you're looking at. You can also get lovely little watercolor sets, which are suitable for using in the field, and having a little palette on there, having a set of colors. And one of the other great things that is available now for everyone, so that you don't have to carry a lot of water into the field, is a water brush. These little brushes have a water container on one half that you can fill up and use in the field, and it has a little synthetic brush on the end, and that you can use with your watercolor kits to create lovely colors on your pages. So just a very bit about, little brief thing about pencils. For those of you who are not familiar with pencils, they come in a range of different graphite mediums. So you'll probably see the numbers on pencils at the base of them, which says B, HB, but then there's also a range of Bs, which are softer and darker graphite pencils for creating darker effects with your drawings. And then there's the H range, which is hard, and it's a much finer, lighter graphite for doing very fine lines and creating lighter surfaces on your drawings. Some of the things that we do when we do our nature journaling workshops is to cover a little bit about some of the basic drawing principles, and they're not hard to understand. Things like understanding value scale. So when you're looking at a drawing, you can look at from dark shades through to light shades, and you can use stippling, close up, which is lots of little dots all very close together, right through to cross hatching and hatching marks, and all sorts of different marks, but making sure that you're looking at values from dark to light on every subject. Line and linear drawing is another exercise that we do using different mark making techniques to represent different surfaces and textures. And then the other principle is light and shade. And as you know, when you look at a tree or a round subject, whichever direction the light is coming through, you will have shadows on one side and roundedness with the light on the other side. So you're always thinking about directional light when you're drawing, so that you can represent the darks and lights on a drawing very easily. One of the most important things about drawing is looking before you start drawing, and your brain actually helps you to understand a lot about what you're seeing before you even pick up a pencil. So looking before you draw is one of the most fundamental things for anyone who wants to learn to draw. blocking in the basics and doing some very broad shapes, lightly and loosely, checking your proportions on your drawing, and then drawing the subject in more detail with more definite lines, adding value and colour, so darks and lights or colours onto your drawing, and then putting in extra detail in the foreground if you're doing a subject that has the close-up and further away distance components. And one of the things that artists often talk about is trying to avoid overworking a drawing, because sometimes you can take it too far and spoil it. But that's a very, very subjective decision that everyone needs to make when they're drawing. These are some of the warm-up drawing exercises that we often do. And if we have time, I'm happy to run a couple of those tonight. But they're exercises using your eye, hand and brain to create memory skills with your drawing, and using the opposite hand to draw from. It actually can help to train develop new neural pathways in your brain, so that you're actually learning to see and you're learning to recreate what you're seeing on your page. This is a lovely example of a nature journal page, and this is where I'd like to ask some questions. What do you notice about this page? It was, this was from the conference I went to over in the States last year, and we were looking at marine things at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And this is one of the participants' double page drawing that she did in her nature journal of this exercise. And so what do you notice about this page that's different from just an artwork?
When I look at it, I'm drawn to the spiral, the symmetry of the spiral, and the shading like inside the shell. Yes,
so value and tone, but also representing structure and function of the shell. What else do you notice about this as a piece of work? What are some of the elements that have been included in this sketch?
So I think some of the other participants should put a word in here.
Paula, do you want to provide some comments on what you're noticing with this drawing?
Yeah, the first thing I noticed was that it's more scientific than just an artwork, with the measurements and notes.
Yes, exactly. So there's scale and measurements used in there. There's symbols and arrows to point to different features and highlights that are in that drawing. And what else can you see there? On the top of the right-hand page, one of the sentences has been highlighted using a little bit of watercolour. What do you notice about the text on the page?
It's asking questions, so inquiring.
Yes, exactly. So it's much more than an artwork. It is full of questions. So how old is the shell? Do the outside ridges describe time it took to grow like a tree? And the questions are actually derived from the observations that you're making on that subject. And you're not expected to answer them on the spot, but actually thinking about those questions and bringing the inquiry-based mindset to your drawing adds an enormous amount of value to what you're doing, and learning and the critical thinking that we talked about from the start. The other thing that you can see about this page is the use of colour is very effective. So on the right-hand side, there's a little inset box that has 3 sketches on it with a watercolour background, which highlights a cross-section from the shell. The other thing that you can see, so all of the drawings of this shell are looking at from the underside, from the top side, from the side, and imagining what the cross-section and the geometry of that shell would be. It's also noticing textures. So there's a description on the left-hand side, rough texture with an arrow, smooth texture on the inside with an arrow, and then it's using tonal variation to highlight the three-dimensional aspects of that shell. So darker inside, lighter on the outside, where it's going to be much lighter. So it's a really interesting research tool for anyone who wants to learn about and understand this subject better. And every page that you make and every single observation that you take in the field, or it could be in your own backyard, adds to your knowledge and the memory of your experience and engagement with that particular subject. So over time, if you have a nature journal, as did some of those very famous original scientists, you will start to build a massive knowledge of nature and how it works, and you can start to answer some of the questions and research your own observations further, which really is an enormous aid to your own learning. So these are basically the 6 steps to nature journaling, and as I said before, the first thing is to look at something, observe and understand it. So here, using all of your senses, sight, sound, touch and smell, and taste if it's appropriate. Notice surprising features, notice shapes and angles, lines and textures. Compare and contrast between 2 different things. So, you know, you might have a eucalypt leaf and you might have a Japanese maple leaf, and notice the difference between them. What are the shapes, textures and colours that are different between 2 leaves? Describe the colours and use watercolours or coloured pencils or another colour medium to map out the different colours that you see on a subject or in a landscape. And it's absolutely amazing how many different colours you'll start to notice. Just in a simple leaf like this little eucalypt leaf here that had fallen off a tree, it's full of crimsons and reds and browns and sort of beige colours, all interacting on a single leaf. And once you start to have a look at that and map it, it's quite exciting seeing what's actually happening on that leaf. So being inquisitive and curious and talking out loud about your observation also helps to embed those memories and create a learning experience. So the second step is creating your basic shapes, and as I said, creating frameworks so that you can start to develop just loose, light sketches of what you're looking at, working quickly and noticing some of the shapes and dimensions of your subject. And all the time you're asking questions, and noting down those questions. Then you can start to go in and do some darker pencil or pen work and draw in more detail once you understand the shapes and you've resolved and refined the measurements. And step 4, using a ruler, adding in words, adding in bullet points, adding in any other questions and observations that you might have. And then very importantly, learning to look from a different perspective. So if you have a gum nut or a leaf, like we often look at them from the side, but what do they look like if you look straight from the top looking down? What do they look like from the other side where they attach to a branch? There are so many aspects to everything that looking at it from different points of view is also a very educational experience, and it helps to build those again, the sort of neural pathways around learning to understand a subject and know it really well. And then finally, feedback, and that is meta thinking about the overall image and the experience that you had in that setting and with that subject. So recording your thoughts about what that experience was like, what you learned, what were your feelings or thoughts about engaging with that subject, and just building an overall understanding of what that experience meant for you. Here's a little page from one of John Muir's journals, and this is on the scale of more arty, more less sketchy sort of diagram. And this is not what we're asking everyone to do. This is from somebody who's been nature journaling for a very long time and has established his own practice, his own way of representing things. But what I liked about this and why I wanted to show it was just the use of lettering to create a design with your nature journaling, and also using inset boxes to show different postures with the little bird that he was observing, showing the wings out, the wings back in again, and the way the bird holds itself on a branch. I just thought that was quite an interesting page to share. Here's a couple of other project ideas, and they're just, you know, use of words to create borders around a page. And again, this is a little bit arty, it's not so sketchy, but it does have some interesting things on there. Think of, so possible project ideas might be things like seasonal observations, looking at seeds, different kinds, looking at leaves, different kinds, different species, looking at flowers, understanding how a single plant changes over time and documenting that process. Looking at items on a beach, and there's always so many things that you can see when you're looking at a beach. This is another idea, which is to choose a letter from the alphabet, and every time you go out in the field, start with a different letter. And what I like about this idea is that it starts to make you think about things you may not have looked at before. So, you know, alphabet investigation. So if you chose the letter B, then you might be looking at birds, you might be looking at beetles or bugs or buds or blue items, whatever it might be. And I think it would create a very interesting page. The example on here is done in beautiful muted browns and creams and with black ink sketching. And again, with a lot of text on there sort of describing what that experience was like, and it actually helps to embed those memories and build a knowledge base of what you're seeing. So you've got a date on there, and you're also using line to create a border as part of a design. This is another interesting page, another interesting example. And here, you know, you might like to focus on an individual plant, looking right close at all of the details. And this is a lovely Linnaeus drawing that was a very scientific drawing, but it creates, it shows you the leaves, the fruits, the flowers, the way that that plant works with its stems and branches. And then on the right, looking at from the distance at different tree shapes. So, you know, it's very sketchy, it's nice and loose, and you can just sketch the trees as the different shapes emerge from, on this example, lots of different conifers and deciduous trees. So being creative with your nature journaling will lead to lots of new discoveries and things you may not have seen before. And this is one of the drawings from one of our tutors, looking at the symmetry with plants and the way that spirals and other aspects work. I'm just so observing changes over time, recording an event, making a map or constructing a cross-section of habitat is another way that you can use your nature journals. You can include where and when details, like the date, location, the time of the day, and the weather that was apparent at the time. And I'm sure that everyone's got lots of other ideas about possible things that you could do as well. So, as educators, this is something that I think is really important to consider. And we're really interested in children's well-being. So what we do know is that children's well-being dramatically increases after they've spent time outdoors. There's a definite, and there's been a lot of studies that demonstrate this in the UK and other places. There's an increase in personal well-being and health over time for children by being out in nature. Children learned new things about the natural world. Their experience in nature also assisted with their learning in general. Children developed better relationships with their teachers, and they developed stronger bonds with other children in their groups. They also developed confidence with other capabilities and new experiences that they encountered by learning in nature and transferring those experiences to other settings. So there's a lot of information, study and research, documentation that demonstrates these things. And in the UK, the wildlife trusts are calling for every child in the school for the school curriculum to spend at least 1 hour outside in nature every day of their school education. So it will be interesting to see how this goes. And I think from my experience with working with John Muir laws in the United States, there are whole states now in the United States that are actually have included nature journaling as an essential component of the outdoor curriculum for children in schools over there. And what they're seeing with some of the longitudinal studies and following some of those students who've been doing nature journaling for a long period of time, they've actually become extremely confident learners, particularly with their science, technology, engineering and mathematics subjects, but also language skills. And we have a teacher here in New South Wales, Amanda Lloyd, who did her PhD on literature and learning and children out in nature. And she also has documented through her own research the benefits to literacy skills for children who are learning in nature. So part of the process of nature journaling is obviously eye-hand-brain coordination. And it's critical for all of us, but it's especially important for children's development. And I'm a very, very strong advocate for STEAM, which is the science, technology, arts and mathematics, not just STEM in our education systems. And I think some countries are definitely well ahead on recognising this and incorporating the arts as an essential element of children's education. It's a huge policy dilemma, I guess, for educators, but with a crowded curriculum and the expectations that are often on our children. But I think that at the end of the day, the obvious benefits of arts and observation and nature will actually have a compounding benefit for all the other subjects that children study. Oops. So the other important thing that I think is often missing with children's education is the opportunity for quiet time and for contemplation. And that's what nature journaling offers. It offers the opportunity for children to spend quiet time looking at subjects and learning in their own space, in their own time. And I think it's really important that this is valued and supported by our education system. And, you know, nature journaling is something that children could adopt as a practice to ensure that they have some quiet time and contemplation moments in their day, as well as being outside, even in the schoolyard. Just picking up a leaf in the garden at the schoolyard would be a beneficial thing to do. So here's a couple of current publications on nature journaling. The one that I mentioned earlier, The Law's Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling by John Muir Laws, is probably one of the best known books, but he's also just published a new book which is Teaching Nature Journaling for Educators and Teachers, and it's also available if you're interested in finding out more about that book. So that's it from me. Contact details for NatureArt Lab there, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing.
Thank you, Julia. That was really good. I'm a bit overwhelmed. Do we have some questions? I have some questions myself, but first of all, can we have some questions from the audience? Has anyone got a question there? All right, well, I'll kick it off, Julia. When I go walking in nature,
yes,
I am honed in on the plants, right? And I take lots of photos as I go along of the different plants I discover. How does that, so essentially what I've got in the end after I've been on, say, a bushwalk is a photo journal
yes.
of what I have seen.
Mm.
Obviously, the drawing of it requires much more time and contemplation.
Yes, exactly.
So what extra benefits would I draw from if I took a bit more time?
Well, this is a really interesting question, and it is something that a lot of people are very comfortable with just taking a photograph, and it's very easy, it's very straightforward to grab your phone and take a photograph, and I do all the time as well. But there is a distinct difference in the memory pathways and the way that you will understand a subject by actually drawing it than looking at a photo. By drawing it, you're actually exploring so much more of what you're seeing, and than you possibly can take in from a two-dimensional photograph. It's a very, very different process for the brain, and that's that eye-hand-brain coordination that is essential for building that learning process. I think what often happens when you take a photograph, it's a moment in time that passes very quickly, and if you sit and actually spend some time with that subject, you will remember it in so much more detail if you actually stop and take the time to do that, rather than a press of the button on the camera and then moving on. There's a fundamental difference in the way that learning happens, from looking at something with a photograph to actually drawing and understanding, like, for example, that shell drawing that I showed you. It's a very, very different process. And again, you don't have to be an artist to do that. It's really what you're doing by drawing what you're seeing. You're actually training your brain and your eyes to see a lot more detail than you would if you just took a photograph. And the other example was the very first slide with that beautiful white plant. I haven't actually looked up the name of it yet, so somebody might be able to tell me what that was.
Which one was that?
I'll just quickly see if I can find it. Was the very first slide that I showed with that beautiful white flowering bush that's out at the moment in Canberra. It just is this one. I'll just hold that up so you can see that there.
Oh, right.
Yes,
Is that Petunia?
No, it's a very small leaved shrub. It is flowering everywhere in Canberra at the moment, in the nature reserves. But if you have a close look at those little flowers and the arrangement of,
I'm just trying to think. I should know what it is. I've seen it.
Yes.
Can't think of the name of it at the moment.
Yes. So if you say, I've taken this photograph, but what I want to do is actually go and sit down and look at one of these flowers, look at the buds, look at the little the seed development, because they're also just about to change to seed. And they have these gorgeous little brown, dry, almost like little purse-like seeds in clusters at the end of this flowering process. And it is equally interesting as the flowers. So, if you wanted to do a study of that particular plant, then you're going to be looking at the flowers, the shape of the leaves, the underside of the leaf, the top side of the leaf, the way that the seed pods develop, the shape of the branches, where the leaves come off that stem. You're going to be measuring perhaps the height of the plant, making a note of how high this plant grows, how wide it grows, noticing the dates that the flowers emerge and the seed pods emerge, and understanding how long that process takes. What you also would be doing when you were engaging with that flower, you might be looking at what pollinators are visiting that plant and making a note of which flies are visiting that plant. What do they look like? How often do they visit? How long do they stay on that flower? These are all questions that come to mind when you're looking at a plant. So what birds are going to pollinate this plant? There's so many things. Are there any moth species that might be using the leaves as part of their food cycle, for example? Are they pupating on the plant or underneath it? There's just so many things that you can learn more about that you're not even going to find in a book. These observations, these understandings are a very personal experience with what it is that you're looking at and what you're seeing and learning about. And the emotional response to that. So, you know, that plant for me, and the way that the autumn light was falling on those flowers, which are actually in flower right now, it was just beautiful. And I felt like writing a lot about all of that, and I will do. I've just got to get out there in the field and do it.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying, I mean, taking a photo obviously is a start, that you've actually noticed the thing, but
Yes,
you're missing a whole lot of other stuff.
yes, that's right, which would enrich your personal knowledge of that plant and the whole ecosystem around it.
See, I used to do drawings of plants, but I seem to have lost the skill. When I was studying.
It's just about practice. So as soon as you start actually drawing again, you'll be amazed at what you actually can do. It's just practice. And the nice thing about nature journaling is that because you're not trying to create a perfect artwork, and you're writing on it and you're writing questions, you're not actually expecting it to be a beautiful artwork. Like this gorgeous drawing that Polly Sutherland did on this last slide here. Now that's a scientific drawing, very, very precise, showing the makeup of the inside of the flower. But what we're talking about can be anything from between that right through to just a little loose sketch and notations that are really, really important in understanding your subject. So, you know, this beautiful illustration hasn't got any notation on it. We've got no information from an oral perspective about what this is, what it means, what the textures are like, how the flower grows in its landscape. What the leaf and the broader plant looks like. We don't have any of that information, but on a nature journal page, you can actually show that. And it makes such a difference to your understanding of that subject. It's a bit like, it's all about curiosity, it's all about learning and that growth mindset and being prepared to stop and focus on something that you wouldn't normally do. Giving yourself permission to sign out from everything else that's happening in your world and just focus on that little plant for it might be an hour, but it's a wonderful, wonderful hour spent.
It's actually an antithesis of our modern world.
It absolutely is. And I think what's happened right now with this pandemic, this is the perfect time to put our focus back into the things that matter, the things that are important, rather than the busyness of our everyday lives, which simply are not important. These things are the things that matter, and it's that slowing down, the mindfulness that's good for you, good for your health, good for your mental health and well-being, but also good for your your understanding of our world, which exists, and we need to look after it and understand and preserve it.
So essentially what you're saying, you're really trying to take us back to what we were as children, because a very young child notices the details of everything. They look minutely, in minute detail, at every object they see.
Yes. And that's right. And giving yourself permission to do that, because I think often what becomes an adult life is switching off all of those inquiry-based learning processes. And so by doing something like nature journaling, you will notice a massive change in the way that your outlook on life is. You know, things suddenly become more meaningful because you understand them and you're looking at them a little bit more closely.
Julia, I really love this, and I'm sorry I came in late to your presentation. Can I just ask, how do you get kids who are hesitant to start? Like, and I find myself a bit of a perfectionist, and I look at Polly's drawing and I want to be there. But you said before, just sort of start from scratch. Is that? Yep.
Yes. Well, look, you know, the lovely thing about this is that you can. It's so simple what you can do. So if you're going for a nature walk, and you know, you can take a little book like this. Plus a couple of pencils, and just sit and draw. Just sit down on the ground, on a rock, and draw. And suddenly you'll start to. Oh, actually, this is really interesting. Nothing else really matters right now, and it's such a nice feeling to give yourself permission to do that. So I think with children, you know, giving them a little kit with the and as a family doing these activities together, I think sitting around something that they notice or that they love or that they're interested in, I would say is the way to start. So you know, if you can get children engaged on a walk and start noticing the differences between things, comparisons between things, looking at colours, looking at shapes, looking at textures, looking at behaviour. We're seeing amazing things in Canberra right now, and a lot of them are very unseasonal. You know, for example, 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you noticed, but I shared it on our NatureArt page, but we had the little pasture moths come out, and that was an unseasonal emergence. Those moths would normally come out in spring, but they all came out in autumn because we hadn't had any rain for such a long time. And it was 2 weeks of watching these little moths flying backwards and forwards across the green pastures and finding mates, and you know, we went out again today. They've all gone. They've finished that cycle, and you know, so it's going to be interesting now to watch and see what happens next. Do we start to see the caterpillars come out? Do we start to see the evidence of them on those fields again as they go through their life cycles? But we're coming into winter, and I don't know. I'm really curious to find out what's going to happen next. So it can be something as small as from a little moth that's living in a pasture through to a beautiful gum tree, which is majestic and lots of different coloured bark and leaves and birds visiting it, and you know, from the micro to the really large, you can choose any subject, and it's really open to you as to what you want to do and what you want to investigate. But it's really good for kids and really good for adults too.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I'll just say there's one thing we're doing, because when we first came back from Costa Rica and I had to reschedule our entire program, I just thought, okay, what can we do that is a meaningful thing for people during this time when we really can't run face-to-face classes? So we've set up a project called Reflections on Nature. It's a page and a space that we're encouraging people to share drawings, sketches, photographs, notes, observations that they're seeing. And we have a small team who are providing some guided topics every fortnight. So if you're interested in joining that, most welcome to. It's an open, safe space that we're encouraging nature lovers and drawers to get together and just share what they're looking at. We're hoping eventually that we can share some of the work in an exhibition and maybe even produce a book on what people are observing and noticing with nature in Canberra. But it's actually gone Australia-wide. So we've got lots of people from all over Australia observing nature in their own home space and their own local nature parks as an activity that gives people a quality experience during a time when there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so what we wanted to do was provide a project that people could do in their own time without any cost and just enjoying observing nature. And so what I'm trying to do is offer online tutorials every few weeks on an introduction to nature journaling, just to get people started. And the results so far from people who've been doing our classes over the last few weeks, just stunning. I'm just blown away with the pages they've created and the things that they're drawing and seeing. It's been really, really wonderful. And I think you'll see some of those drawings coming through on our page over the coming months.
I'm constantly amazed with the way in which the arts sector has been able to do so much while people have been in isolation. Yeah, meaningful stuff. Yes,
and it's actually the arts are our culture. They are who we are. They are they represent our emotions, our responses to issues and topics and things. And I think the combination for me, the combination of nature plus art gives you the opportunity to benefit from both at the same time. So that's I think the arts and a lot of artists and the arts people in the arts are also need to be adaptive and need to be able to respond to things quickly. And I think they've also been the hardest hit with this, in terms of financial support. Yes. And so I'm hoping that there will be support for artists who are wanting to do some of these things. I know the ACT Arts has just been able to fund some arts grants called Homefront, which is great. But, mental health and wellbeing and doing a project like this is also a really, really important thing at this time for people who have a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And it gives people a very positive way to engage their time and their focus.
Well, certainly we'll promote that on our Facebook and the A2E2 Facebook as well. I just want to finish off because I want to stop the recording. So I just wanted to say, Julia, thank you for the work you're doing. I just think it's amazing, and I'm going to have a go. When I go on my walks, instead of just taking photos, I'm going to actually get myself a journal and start doing some little sketches. I don't hold out much hope though for any drawings, but I believe what you're saying. It's a way of slowing and of noticing actually what's around you. And I think it's, for our children, this would be an excellent way to go. I really, the promotion of kids having journals when they go out for walks, so they're actually looking at what's around them.
Yeah, that's right. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing your journal pages, Viv. And please send them to me so I can.
I don't know about sending them to you. So I'll just finish this. People can continue conversations after this, but I just want to finish the recording. So thank you very much, and thank you for the various people that popped in.
Thanks, Vivian.